Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Dr. Dandapani and I hold a PhD in English and you're watching Literary Studies with me. Today's topic is about Gothic literature and Frankenstein, and also about the question why Frankenstein still matters. And I have read a bunch of texts and I have a pad of hints to aid my video presentation. So let's get into today's topic. So, when we think about Gothic literature, what comes to our mind? First, we think about the dark castles, that monochrome black and white settings, and the stormy nights, and the wandering of mysterious figures, and the supernatural events. So, Gothic literature is just more than a bunch of frightening stories, and it is actually an established literary tradition, and it explores elements such as fear, isolation, mystery, and the dark aspects of human mind, the human society, and even the human ambition. So, we can see Frankenstein, the novel written by Mary Shelley in the year 1818, to be an influential example of this literary tradition, the Gothic literary tradition. And when we take the origins of the Gothic literature, we go back to the 18th century England, and it is when Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto was published in the year 1764, and by literary historians, it is considered to be the first Gothic literature or a Gothic piece of literary work in the timeline of literary history. So we have a bunch of elements and traits that are noticeable in this the Castle of Otranto work, which I would like to point out. First, it's about the supernatural elements or the supernatural events that are featured in this novel, and then there are elements like terror and mystery, the medieval settings, the haunted castles, and the hidden passages, and the family secrets, the prophecies, and even the element of suspense. These features tend to become hallmarks of Gothic fiction in the years that are to come. So, when we talk about the term Gothic, the very literal meaning of the term refers to the medieval architecture. So it's about the grand cathedrals, the castle of Middle Ages, and so on. And how come this Gothic fiction adopted this term and became popular? Actually, the body of literary works that are termed as Gothic fiction, they use these settings, they use these medieval settings, and they reflect a broader fascination towards the past. And it is also a reaction against the Enlightenment's emphasis on reason and rationality. And writers of this genre, they began to explore things like imagination, emotions, fear, that could not entirely be explained by rationality or reason. And when we talk about the traits of Gothic fiction, there are a number of things that we should make a note of. First, it is the atmosphere of mystery and terror, as I said earlier, and there is this element of danger that is imminent, and the explanations are quite uncertain. And the settings are isolated, and we could find the isolated settings in the form of monasteries, forests, mountains, remote landscapes, and so on. And we obviously, there are the elements of supernaturalism or seemingly supernatural. And this body of work also explores psychological conflict and obsession, guilt, and even the emotional extremes in operating within a human being. And there are also tensions between civilization and barbarism, and also between emotion and reason, and between science and morality. So when we come to the later part of the 18th century, writers such as Anne Radcliffe and Matthew Lewis, they expanded this Gothic tradition through their novels, through their literary works, and their literary works established this Gothic fiction even more, and it became a quite influential literary movement of the Romantic era. And the genre gained a new level of complexity when the star topic of today's discussion, when Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was published in the year 1818. And Mary Shelley was only 18 years old when she started to write this novel. It all began in the year 1816, the summer of 1816, and this summer is quite famous in terms of literary history because this is, to put within quotes, this is the year without a summer. And when P.B. Shelley, her husband, and Lord Byron, Mary Shelley, and a few others, they all gathered at a place in Switzerland near Lake Geneva, and Lord Byron proposed this ghost story writing competition. And that is when Mary Shelley had this idea to create this novel, Frankenstein. Later, it became a huge success, and till now, we are discussing about it. The plot is about Victor Frankenstein, who's a young scientist, and he wants to uncover the secrets of life. And with his scientific experimentation, he creates a living being from the assembled body parts. And he becomes quite terrified and horrified from his own creation, such that he abandons his creation. And rejected by society and deprived of companionship, this creature wanders off, and it becomes quite lonely, bitter, and turns into a violent being. And it becomes a tragedy for both the creator and the creation. And it is just not a horror story about a monster, it's even more far complex than that. And there is this danger of unchecked ambition, the idea of which happens to be the central theme of this novel. As Victor Frankenstein, he seeks knowledge, but he does not consider the ethical consequences of his action. And he desires to transcend the natural limits. And there is this broader concern about humanity's pursuit of power echoed in the actions of Victor Frankenstein. And there is this yet another theme, the theme of isolation. Every character in this novel combats loneliness. They are separated from the rest of the world, and they are in isolation. For example, if we take Victor Frankenstein, the young scientist, the mastermind behind all this, he spends time alone with his scientific experiments. And whereas the creature, obviously due to its appearance, it is rejected by the society, and it's still in isolation, and it longs for companionship. Also, the frame narrator of this novel, Robert Walton, he also experiences this loneliness during his Arctic expeditions. So here, at this point, comes the question, who's the monster? So when we take this creature created by Victor Frankenstein, unlike many of the adaptations, it is not something that of a dumb creature. It is quite intelligent, it is interesting, it is articulate, it is emotionally sensitive, and it reads the language, and it learns the language, it reads the book, and it tries to connect with the society, it longs for friendship. And ultimately and unfortunately, it turns into a violent being on account of social rejection, repeated social rejection and social exclusion. And who the real monster is the million-dollar question here. The being who commits these terrible acts, or the creator who abandons his responsibilities? So that is something to ponder over. So from the Gothic perspective, we can analyze this novel, and we can see how many classical Gothic elements are being featured in this literary work. And there are many classic Gothic elements that we could point out. First, there are the dark and sublime landscapes, the mountains, the storms, the Arctic wastelands, and so on. And there is also this atmosphere of dread and suspense. There is this idea of forbidden knowledge, and the idea of human transgression. And when we talk about the forbidden knowledge, we get reminded of Adam and Eve, where they are not supposed to touch the forbidden fruit of knowledge. And it is quite vividly depicted and described in Milton's Paradise Lost, and we get reminded of that. And coming back to Victor Frankenstein's Gothic perspectives, we can find there is a kind of psychological terror in this novel rather than the external threats. and there is obviously this element of horror, but not on account of the appearance of the monster, because the readers could connect with the monster, the so-called creature. It tries to connect with humanity, but unfortunately it could not. And this horror is on account of what might entail human actions and moral failure. And we can also see Frankenstein from a different perspective, that is quite apart from the Gothic perspective. It is all about Gothic literature, and suddenly we can take a turn away from it, because traditional Gothic novels relied heavily upon ghosts, curses, supernatural forces. But Mary Shelley, she replaced supernatural explanations with scientific experimentation, and it can be seen as an early form of science fiction. And Frankenstein, the literary work, stands at the intersection of Gothic literature and modern science fiction, and it is something that is worthy to be noted here. And the influence of Frankenstein is quite huge, quite enormous, and it inspired countless adaptations, including literature, theater, films, plays, drama, and even TV adaptations, and also in popular cultures. More than 2 centuries after its publication, we still think that its themes are quite relevant today. And there are questions about like artificial intelligence, biotechnology, genetic engineering, and even scientific responsibility, the ethical issues behind that, which all echo the concerns of Mary Shelley raised in the form of her literary work in the year 1818. So, to conclude, Gothic literature emerged as a kind of response to the limitations of reason and rationality, and it explores elements of fear, mystery, imagination, and the darker dimensions of human experience. It also had its beginning with the novel The Castle of Otranto, written by Horace Walpole, and then onwards, Gothic tradition developed into an enduring genre in the timeline of literature history. And Frankenstein is one of its greatest achievements, and we can see that Mary Shelley, she combines this Gothic atmosphere with philosophical and scientific questions, and her novel continues to challenge the readers to think about knowledge, what the dimensions of knowledge, responsibility, the ethical dimensions of it, and what it truly means to be a human being. And so that's it for today's video. Thank you for watching. If you found this video quite helpful, please like, share, and subscribe, and stay tuned for more content like this on my YouTube channel. So thanks again for watching.